My Life Now is a half-hour podcast show which regularly features reviews of new releases and all-time classics of both traditionally published and self-published books.
Tune in for special guest interviews and, of course, helpful tips to not only write your next book, but also to help market it.
My Life Now is most often referred to as a great way for authors to get quality exposure and avid readers to discover their next read.
Without further delay, here's another stimulating episode of My Life Now.
Welcome back to another episode of My Life Now. Once again, my name is Dallas here, joining you from Texas. We have another author joining us today. His name is Dan Ostrander. It's great to have you here today. Pleasure to have you. I'm excited to talk about this book that you've written, and you've written two different books that we're going to briefly mention today, but we're going to focus on your book titled George W. Bush and the 2007-2008 Financial Crisis and a Brief History of the American Economic Development. So I'm excited to talk about that. But before we do, I want to give you the opportunity, Dan. Tell us a little bit more about yourself. Then we'll dive right into the book.
Okay, yeah. I was born down in Santa Monica, raised in the Richmond, California area. Went to school at Berkeley and Contra Costa, and then came up to Chico State because I wanted a smaller school. I felt I got a really good education at Chico, and I was a history major, and so taught at Shasta College for a year, and then taught 38 years at Butte College, U.S. history, and I got interested in the presidents, and so I've met 9 different presidents. I've written books with President Ford, George Sr., and then this book with George W. I started out, I had to change the title. It was going to be like Father, Like Son, because of their 2 leadership styles were the same. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't like to be compared to his father. So
right, he made his own wave, right? So why would
he made his own wave? And so actually it turned out to be better because that got me into the brief economic history of the United States, and took me back to Alexander Hamilton and talking about how the financial crisis developed over time.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for being here. We're going to dive right into that book, into the heart of it. So some of your history as well. You taught history for over 38 years. You said that you met 9 of those U.S. presidents. How has this shaped your view of leadership over time?
Well, one way it did is in studying history, I found that I preferred the institution of the presidency over Congress, because I found that in most cases, congressmen were doing what it was take to get reelected or to appease their constituents without sometimes considering the national impact. And a president, and especially my interview with George Sr. About reading My Lives No New Taxes, spent time with him on that. And he said the office is far more important than the president. And he had so much respect for the office of the president. And so, and that's what I felt, is that most presidents, and why I like the presidency, is most presidents do what they feel is best for the country. And that's, they're willing to sacrifice their presidency for that. Ford knew it was going to cost him re-election when he pardoned Richard Nixon, and he did it anyway because he knew it was the right thing for the country. He had to get Nixon off his back so he could operate what was left of his presidency, and people were focused on that. And Bush Sr. was told on April 26th, when he made the decision in 1990 to go against his Read My Lips No New Tax pledge, that this could probably cost you the presidency. And so anyway, he said, I got to do what's good for good governance. So his exuberance for the presidency and the character that he showed, and the character the whole Bush family, shows. I mean, George W. has a great deal of character, and Jeb Bush the same way. It's just a great family. Right. And so anyway, I just got caught up into the presidency that way, and I've enjoyed meeting the different presidents and developing friendships. I've known President Carter. I knew him for 35 years, and even had a house in Plains and spent a week a year with him. So Even though I'm a Republican, I don't look at Republican or Democratic. I look at the facts and let the facts take you where you need to go. And that's what I'm hoping the books will accomplish with people, is to try to get rid of some of the false stereotypes that people have.
Within your book, you talked about some economical development. Of course, like you said, we have two different types of crisis. We see the 1990 budget showdown and a 2008 financial meltdown. What are some common traits that you saw between both crises as you studied those?
Well, one of the things that I learned, and I got this when I was working on the book Bush, Read My Lips, Don't Do Taxes. I wanted Bernanke to talk to me and stuff. He said he couldn't talk to me. He'd only talk to me through Joe Coynes, who was public finance director for the Fed. And so one of the important points that he brought out was lag time. People don't understand the time you pass a law to the time the law goes into effect, the time the budget is implemented to the time it trickles through the economy and has an effect can be years. In fact, one of the things I point out in the financial crisis book is there were 10 laws passed between 2007 and 1975 rather, in 2007, that trickled through the economy and created the financial crisis. And this was done by Democrats, by Republicans, and it was a slippery slope, and each one just added more to the slide. And so people don't understand. It's not an immediate impact. And there are 7 other reasons why the financial crisis took place, which I explained in the book. And I feel that this is the most comprehensive. It took me 7 years to write this book, and getting all of the right statistics and everything like that, and the government accounting office versus the Treasury would round numbers off. And I even put it in the book. They were $400 and something billion off difference between the two of them in their final numbers. Who cares? It's only $400 billion.
Right. Wow.
And that's government accounting. You see what I mean? And so, but I wanted to nail down the numbers as best I could, and it took a long time, and the numbers kept changing. But that's the way the government operates. But so anyway, but yeah, it's the lag time and how long it takes things to slip through the economy that people need to try to understand.
Yeah. And based on those different years of crisis, 1990, 2008, do you think that we are coming into another one of those crises moving forward in the coming years?
I don't know. I don't know. Trump's policies we're going to have another financial crisis. The first one was in 1792, and you had them all the way through American history, 1834 and so forth, and 35, and the 1920s and so forth. But so you're gonna have financial crisis in the future.
Yeah.
The key thing is for people to keep an open mind about what they see going in the economy, have an understanding and a perspective on how our economy operates, how it developed, and not take the media or politicians' words for things, because they're being manipulated. And too often people develop prejudices as a Democrat or as a Republican, and they just spit those things out. One of the things that was typical, and this just happened, Larry Kudlow was interviewing Grover Norquist, who had accused Bush just 10 days ago of lying about Read My Lips, Don't Do Taxes. And it really ticked me off because he's anti-taxes and everything like that, and it's an ideology for him. He didn't understand the facts. He didn't do any research into the situation. And I even had a friend call up Kudlow's office and tell him they need the other side of the story. Because Bush I talked to him about it, made a conscious decision to go against the Read My Lips because it's what was needed for the nation. Yeah. And so that's the problem, that you get people like Norquist coming out and making these statements, who has a big following and so forth, but he's uttering Republican ideology, or you get Democrats out there doing Democratic ideology, and they're cramming it down people's throats. And people live such busy lives, so they pick up what they can here and there and so
Right.
forth and go with it, you know. And so I'm just hopefully what I'm trying to do is I use Jewish history to teach critical thinking. So history was a tool to teach people how to think and evaluate about different events. And so I drew historical parallels. For example, how I got started with doing the book with Bush is I compared Thomas Jefferson and the Louisiana Purchase with George Bush and read my lips, no new taxes. You see, and so how do those two comply? Well, nowhere in the Constitution did Jefferson have the power to buy territory. He was a strict interpretationist of the Constitution, and so he violated everything he believed in, his political philosophy, his party values, and he bought Louisiana because it was good for the country. What did Bush do? He violated everything that he believed in, and I can even read you a quote when he said that, you know, that this is breathtaking. Let's see, I think I got the quote right here. This goes against everything he believes in, you know, but he's got to do the right thing for good governance. Right. And so that's what I want people to be able to do, is to develop the ability to criticize, to think, and not take anybody's word. I used to tell my students, if you believe anything I tell you to be the absolute gospel, you're a fool. You take what I have to say, you take what the textbook has to say, you put it together, and you go out and match it out with the real world.
Yeah.
And that's what we need people in society to do. See, and they don't do that. And a lot of times it's because they just don't have the time, you know, but maybe they'll be more skeptical, and you hear this, say, okay, I hear that, but that doesn't mean I'm going to believe it.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It's a great point, because we have to find truth somewhere, right? So
Right.
we need to make sure those sources are accurate and have our best interest in mind. Talking about, go ahead. Do you have something else to say there?
Yeah, and look for counterbalance. You know, look for this over here. This says this. Well, look and see if you can find something over here that kind of balances that out or contradicts it. You know.
When it comes to George W.'s leadership, especially during that 2008 financial crisis, do you think there's any misconceptions, any history that was overlooked or misunderstood during that time?
Bush saw that what had to be done. He had the vision. The key thing about leadership is you have to have the vision to see the problem.
Right.
And it's like, I always use this like as a quarterback on the field. You got to see the whole field. You got to see the open man is. You can throw the pass. I was also an assistant basketball coach, so I look at seeing the whole view of the court. So the point guard could throw the pass down the court, you know, to an open man. Mm-hmm. So you got to have that vision. You got to see the right path to take the country. Then the second thing, and which this is what Bush had, you have the guts to do it. So a lot of times you're going to get a lot of criticism from people, but you got to have the guts to continue the process because you know you're doing the right thing. And that comes from within here. And so that's what Bush did.
Innovation Nation, I'm all in. Create your dream business online or create your dream lifestyle. Mantech Design specializes in turning any idea, product, or service into a 7-figure business utilizing online leverage. Find more information to achieving your dreams by searching mantechdesigns.com. That is MANTECH designs.com. Chat receives a phone call from the hospital only to learn that his wife has been a victim of the most common crime these days, identity theft. Her microchip was cut out of her hand during a store robbery. Chat's wife Jessica is the picture-perfect citizen behind whom he can easily hide his Christianity, but he soon realizes she needs Jesus as well. Her sole focus is on adopting a chipless child from among the children surfacing in society without any record of their existence or parentage. Find your copy of The Nebulae System by Christine Johnson on Amazon today.
He says, let's figure out the right thing to do and do it. I made up my mind. The U.S. government was all in. He said this in a meeting right after things took a dump on the financial crisis. Then he says, this strategy was breathtaking, intervening in the free market. It flew against all my instincts, but it was necessary to pull the country out of the panic. That's great leadership.
Yeah.
And that's what W did.
I like
And
what
that's
you're
why
saying
people
here.
criticize him, and people criticize him for for TARP. So the government made $403 billion profit, as I said, and gave money away to people who were losing their homes.
Yeah.
And yet Elizabeth Warren says, oh, we're just a gimmick for the rich to get richer, but she doesn't come up with any solutions. She's always criticizing and throwing out those one-liners. But, okay, what would you do? How would you have solved that problem, And that's the problem with the critics, because they throw out the one-liners and they sound good, but it plays right into people's ideas of, these guys are the bad guys, these guys are the good guys,
Right. Yeah.
So
Why do you think it's important for us to ground this modern crisis in foundational U.S. Economic history? Let me say that one more time. Why was it important for you to ground this modern crisis in fundamental U.S. economic history, going all the way back to Alexander Hamilton? Why was this important for you?
okay, why was it important to go back to Hamilton?
Yeah.
The reason being is our first financial crisis occurred in 1792. Alexander Hamilton was the first Secretary of State. Okay, if you want to learn how to solve a problem, the best thing to do is to see how people have solved it. And so Alexander Hamilton created the Bank of the United States, which was the forerunner to the Federal Reserve System. And so Bernanke, who was a student of studying Alexander Hamilton and studied financial crisis, went all the way back to say, how did Hamilton deal with our first financial crisis? The key was liquidity. You got to get liquidity into the system and use the Federal Reserve to get liquidity in. You use the Bank of the United States to get liquidity in. And so by doing that, see different things that different people used and why they used them. And some of them were successful and some weren't. So you go back into history, you learn from history and how to solve the problems in the present. So some of the tools will work and some of them won't. So you kind of trial and error, or you make judgment calls along the way.
Yeah. So you're saying for those listening today, we should look at the past, the economic past, the history, how those things were responded to, and that's how we can better evaluate what's coming to tomorrow or happening today.
Right. And the title of the book is, the economic development of the United States, the past economic development of the United States. I go back and pull from the history up to present to explain our values, to explain the historical problems and how they were attacked and so forth. So people get an idea of what I'm talking about, see, and what they need to do. And you always have to have an open mind. I've gone into things thinking, like, for example, when I did the paper with President Ford and his pardoning of Nixon, I was disappointed that he pardoned Nixon because I wanted to see history play out. Yeah. And so by the time I went through and did all the research, I found that Ford did the right thing. Here's the interesting thing. My colleague in the office right next door to me taught at Penn State. He left the country when Nixon got elected president because he disliked him so much. He came back and was teaching at Butte College. And so I used him as my sounding board on that paper. So this guy hates Nixon. Ford pardoned Nixon. And so I followed the facts. And by the time I got done, Bhagwati agreed that Ford had done the right thing. So that was a good testing ground. You see what I'm saying? And that's what you got to do. You got to follow the facts. You can't follow opinions. You can't follow ideology. You got to follow the facts and see where they take you. And sometimes you don't like where they take you, but that's what you got to look at.
I want to go back into some of your conversations with those presidents, those insights that you had. What would you say out of those conversations, if you could share one of those, within the podcast today, that most influenced your view of crisis management?
Well, I say a couple of conversations. One that I had with Richard Nixon. I really loved Nixon. He was such a bright mind, and I really appreciated him. And talking about leadership, and he had 3 points for leadership. And I've mentioned it over, I've used it over and over in the book. And one is the vision, having to be able to see the right path to take. The second is the guts. And then the third is pragmatism. You got to always be willing to make adjustments and have compassion in making those adjustments. And so those were the three principles that guided Richard Nixon as president and leadership. Wow. The other conversation, which was really meaningful, really had an impact on me, was my discussion with President Bush 41 about the presidency and how the office of the president was more important than the man, and the amount of respect he had. I mean, he was just so emotional about that it was overwhelming to me, you know. And so anyway, I think those are two probably of the most important about that. You know, I had I don't know how to describe this anyway. Ronald Reagan was really a unique individual, because Reagan thought in terms of concepts. He didn't need to know how many warships we had or anything else. He had a unique gift of seeing the big picture, having that vision to see which direction to go and so forth. So if he wanted to know how many battleships we had, he'd ask the Secretary of the Treasury. So he didn't get bothered and bogged down in numbers, names, dates, and all this kind of stuff. And one of the key members of the staff told me that he'd walk in a cabinet meeting, be late, everybody's arguing about different issues, and he would get down to the bottom line quicker than anybody else. You know, they were in one cabinet meeting, they were talking about how the Russians had more military power than we did and everything like that. Reagan came up with what Trump's using now, and saying, well, if we can't beat them militarily, we'll beat them financially. We'll spend them into oblivion. Star Wars. Yeah. See, and that's exactly what happened, you know. And so Reagan's leadership style, his thinking ability, how he saw he could always see what direction to go, was phenomenal.
Yeah. Is there a point in your research where you just realized this changes everything I thought I knew?
Like, I've met 9 different presidents, and as you meet the presidents, you know, you're kind of intimidated at first, but pretty soon you get pretty relaxed, and you realize, as President Carter told me one time, everybody puts your pants on one leg at a time, you know, and so forth. And I think that in meeting these different presidents, none of them are the way the public views them, you know, and so forth. And like, even though I'm a Republican, I love Jimmy Carter. I didn't agree with all of his policies, but he's a completely different type of person than what some of the media makes him out to be, you know. And I even bought a house in Plains to spend time with him, you know, and so forth. Houses are cheap in Plains, so and everything. But he was a man of great character, and this is what I loved about him, because he would, if he said something, you know, you could count on it, and so forth. And Nixon was a man of, on the opposite end, Nixon was a man also of great character, and he was really big on loyalty, and he had a lot of integrity. And even though the public didn't see that, I had a chance to view that and really appreciated that. That's what I mean. The things that you see about the presidents, you see what I mean? And then people made fun of Gerald Ford because he stumbled, you know, on Air Force One, and then hit his head in a swimming pool swimming. He's one of the best athletes to ever come into the White House. You know, he played college football on a national championship team. He's team captain, you know, boxing coach at Yale, and so forth. And so forth. And he was a man also of great integrity. And so, I mean, all these people that I feel like I've got a chance to meet and see, these experiences have all made me realize that the stereotypes that are created about a president, you can't believe, you know. But what society's supposed to believe, you just keep an open mind. You see, is what you have to do. And that's what I hope readers will do, is keep an open mind and think for themselves and evaluate, why did this guy do this? Why did Bush go against his no new tax pledge? Did he gain anything personally? Did he gain anything politically? No, it cost him on both fronts. So why would he do it? You know? And so you start questioning those things. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
it does make sense. And I want to end with this question here today. If you had 30 seconds to explain why leadership matters in crisis, what would you say?
30 seconds. It all comes back to, again, the vision. You got to have you got to have the vision to see the path to take. Not everybody takes the right path, and it doesn't always work out. But I've got a quote from Teddy Roosevelt that basically, I'll just read the first part of it here. It says, it's not the critic who counts, nor the man who points out how the strong man stumbles but could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena and the sweat and blood, who strives violently, who errs and comes short again and again, and without error or shortcomings, but he does actually strive to do the deeds. And it goes on. So you're not always going to be successful as a president, but you make choices based upon the information you have. You have the guts to carry that out. And people, it's easy to criticize. As I said, Elizabeth Warren's great at doing that, and other people are too, because they give these one-liners, but they never give any solutions. And the credit belongs to the man in the arena. And Nixon even wrote a book about that, So that's what I was saying is vision. The vision isn't always accurate, but you got to evaluate the reason for the actions of the president and not give it some little quick
One liner, right? Exactly. I understand what you're saying there. Is this so? You have these two books. Do you have any future projects coming?
This one might blow you away. Carter versus Trump. Okay. The parallel, this just came to me. If you saw, did you see the Trump and Lewinsky thing, Zelensky thing on
I
television
did.
in the Oval
Yes.
Office?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And the media afterwards accused Trump of sucking up to Russia. And, Zelensky wanted guarantees. And Trump said over and over again, I can't do that. I got to be neutral.
Mm-hmm.
And so the end result of that was he wasn't sucking up to Russia. He was sending a message to Russia. If you come and talk to me, you'll get a fair shake. And you need to settle this problem. And I'm your best solution for it.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And so that's what Trump was trying to communicate. I thought it was brilliant that he did that. I got it right up there with Carter and the Arab-Israeli peace treaty. Got it signed by both Carter and Begin right there. And so anyway, neither one of those guys could trust each other. They hated each other. Carter brought them to Camp David. They each stayed in a separate little quarter. And they knew that the only chance they were going to get to settle their differences was through Carter, because they could trust him. He wouldn't sell them out. Yeah. And so Trump said, I'm not going to sell out Putin. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So you come here, we'll talk about peace, and you both get a fair deal. And so you come to the table. And so they put with Carter, I monitored several international elections with Carter, and people trusted him. So they would come to him and say, okay, this is my bottom line. This is my bottom line. And he would take it and try to work out a bottom line that would be acceptable for both of them.
Right.
And so that's talking about those two people who are way over here and way over here. You wouldn't think that there was a commonality, but it was a great act of leadership on Carter's part, putting together the Arab-Israeli peace treaty. And if Trump can pull this off, he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. You see what I mean?
Right.
And
how long do we have to wait for this book? How long until you're finished with it?
I don't know. I'm trying to get this one, off the shelf and so forth, But anyway, so I look for parallels like that. You see what I mean? And that one just jumped off the screen at me whenever I was watching Trump. I'm just thinking, wow, that was really a brilliant move on his part. And, and that's going to give Putin confidence that he can go to Trump and get a fair deal. Now, there's a lot of dancing going on and all this kind of stuff. And Putin's trying to improve his negotiating position. But I think eventually, I think Trump will get it done because it needs to be done.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time here today, Dan. I really appreciate it. If you could tell us again the title of your two books and how we can connect with you and purchase these.
Yeah, the first one is Read My Lips, No New Taxes, a Ford written by George Bush. Also, President Ford participated in that book because I discuss his leadership role in pardoning Richard Nixon. And so he participated in the book, and there's a chapter on that about him doing that. And then the second book is George W. Bush, the 2007-8 financial crisis, and a brief economic history of the United States. And so trying to pull together historical parallels and problems so people understand from an historical perspective how we got where we were. And it wasn't just something that happened overnight. And, so you have this factor of just sliding things into place,
Right. And these books are available on Amazon. I have a link in the description below. Do you have a website that we can connect with as well, Dan?
Yes. The website is Dan Ostrander at books.com.
Sure.
And so Amazon, and then also Page Publishing has done the Read My Lips, No New Tax book as well. So Amazon's done both, and Page Publishing is doing the Read My Lips.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us. I appreciate your time here today. We hope to have you back on the podcast with that book that you're writing.
Thank you for listening and supporting another episode of My Life Now.
Please remember to subscribe to our podcast show and share it with a friend.
Together, we can keep the message of these books alive.
Until we turn the next page together, stay classy.